Fire Emblem Engage doesn't often get the praise it deserves for finally opening up the Avatar romance pool to every character, regardless of gender. Of course, a bunch of them got turned awkwardly platonic in localization, and of course this also comes with the ability to give your engagement ring to prepubescent children, but as far as lazy, half-hearted gestures of inclusivity go, Engage at least makes a try for it. Hampering this effect, however, is its widely disliked decision to restrict paired endings only to the main character, something no other modern Fire Emblem does. I would, though, be remiss if I didn't point out that Engage was not the first Fire Emblem to do this, but for that, we're going to have to go back over 20 years. Binding Blade is another unsung hero of this franchise's strides in character interaction. It adapted the optional dialogues and love growth of Genealogy of the Holy War into the C to A support system that has appeared in almost every game in the series since. Again, there are drawbacks, like how GBA supports take an eon to build, or how FE6 doesn't have a support log, at least in the official game. Whoever programmed one into the English patch is awesome. We can cut it some slack for being the first. But it also happens that Binding Blade handles paired endings just like Engage, with only Roy's 6 potential wives getting altered ending cards if you unlock their A supports. That's pretty disappointing, because while FE6 has more than its fair share of uninteresting support lines because you can tell that the writers were still getting used to the concept, there are some really solid ones in here too that in other games would very likely lead to paired endings. Both of the later GBA games have them for characters other than the Lords, and that got me thinking about what endings FE6 might have had if its supports had been given the same attention. There are a few rules I'll be putting in place to start. One is that I won't be imagining new supports or altering the text of existing supports. I'll be basing these ending options purely off what's already in the game. Another is that I have to set some kind of limit on how many paired endings we can reasonably expect to have. Both Blazing Blade and Sacred Stones have 34 paired endings, which is a little weird when you think about it, since FE8 has roughly 10 fewer playable characters and 30 or so fewer support lines. But let's pretend that 34 is an arbitrary magic number for GBA paired endings and apply it to FE6, which is going to create some tight competition since this game's roster is even bigger than its prequels. On that note, in spite of my well-known preference for gay ships, I'm going to do my best to propose a range of paired endings comparable to what we see in the other GBA games, which means lots of straight romance, some suggestive gay subtext, and even some platonic endings, although with so few slots available, those won't be as much of a priority. Yep, Three Houses did not invent platonic paired endings. With all of that out of the way, we've got over 50 characters and 143 support lines to get through, so let's get going. Right away, we're going to have to knock those 34 slots down to 28, because Roy's 6 paired endings are sticking around. While it is a little odd that a 15-year-old child has more marriage options than almost any other lord in the series that isn't an Avatar or in a game with breeding mechanics, Roy is notoriously lacking in lord privileges in just about every other aspect of gameplay, so I suppose he can have this one. He gets his pick of his childhood best friend / possible first cousin, a Pegasus Knight for some of those classic Marth Sita vibes, a nomad whose mom could alternatively be his mom, yeah, it's weird, a dancer with no respect for personal boundaries, a half-dragon of indeterminate age, and his teacher. That's something else that didn't start with Three Houses. If I were to give Roy a buy option, it would have to be his milk brother, Wolt, but 6 is more than enough endings for one character. In addition to Roy's harem, the only other pairing to be completely set in stone are Zealot and Juno, who are already a married couple and who'd be handled like Pent and Louise from FE7, where they have an auto A support and only have a paired ending with each other. That conveniently removes another 8 support lines from play too. Speaking of which, I've also decided to exclude the 4 characters who have supports in both this game and Blazing Blade, since these guys already get a shot at paired endings in FE7. That's not cutting out much though. Bartra and Karel get to be awkward brothers-in-law, while Marcus and Merlinus are each other's only paired ending in FE7 and have to win some kind of award for being an extremely low-key gay Fire Emblem ship flying under everyone's radar. FE6 sees them kicking back and judging Roy's life choices. And is there any better retirement for a pair of catty old queens? And now we get into the subjective calls. Except kind of not really, because the next category of potential endings are the heterosexual romances that get about as much obvious signposting as one would expect in the GBA games, which can be somewhat infamous for making some pretty big leaps between light flirtation in the A support and a subsequent marriage ending. Awakening and Fates get ragged on for their abrupt S-rank romances, but at least they show that stuff. Anyway, most of these require little explanation, between their lightly romantic banter and the knowledge of familiar Fire Emblem character tropes. Clarine and Rutger, Noah and Fur, Sue and Sin, Fur and Sin, Klein and Thea, Alan and Thea, Lance and Clarine, Shanna and Ward, and Ogier and Laurum. We're almost halfway to 34 already. On top of those are a few that need a bit more justification. Ellen and Zeiss read as decently romantic, but put a pin in these two since we'll be coming back to Ellen later. At first I was going to leave Saul forever alone, as befits such a creepy womanizer, but then I looked back at FE7's paired endings and saw that that game's designated incorrigible flirt Sane gets not one, but two marriage endings. I wouldn't go that far with Saul, but realistically I imagine he'd get an ending with his long-suffering bodyguard Dorothy. At least she knows how to handle him. Finally, there's Astolfo and Igraine, who work out by their A support that they actually used to be a married couple until Astolfo abruptly ghosted her one day to spare her from being used against him in his spy work. The ending of this support line is pretty melancholy, but I could see them being like Harken and Isadora from FE7, where they patch things up after the war. Switching gears to platonic endings, there's a handful that stand out as likely candidates. Lilina and Gonzalez seem to be going for an Esmeralda and Quasimodo vibe. In their A support, Lilina says that she wants to stay with Gonzalez, which I'm not really sure how to interpret, although it's probably not intended to be romantic. Wade and Lot come from the same village and like to nag each other about not dying and thinking about the feelings of their respective sisters, so it's probably safe to label this as a friendly no-homo ending with some possible NPC marriage on the side. Mime and Yoder have also known each other for decades, and have crossed paths multiple times to where whatever they've got going on probably isn't romantic, but they'd still be close in their retirement. Faye is hard to consider in terms of ending since she looks and acts like a toddler, but Sophia seems particularly close with her. And much like Eden in the game's best ending, Sophia being a dragon herself means that unlike Faye's other support partners, they can be friends for centuries to come. Then there's a variety of familial supports, and here I gave the nod to those between characters who don't already have an immediate relationship and who may have some more development to do, like Laurum with her adoptive father Douglas. Chad with either Lou or Ray would make sense since he's basically an adopted brother to both of them, but it would be too awkward to choose just one, so I'll have to leave them out. Mime takes on Ray as her pupil in the study of the dark arts, which would be especially hilarious as an ending considering how much Mime loves to drag her actual grandson. Lastly, I should probably toss a paired ending at Clarine and Klein, in the vein of the one the Renee twins get in FE8. Clarine is the second in a long line of characters in this series with an eyebrow-raising fixation on their brothers. I'll leave you to take that as you will. We're now down to just 8 open slots, and you'll notice that thus far I've exercised considerable restraint in not reaching for gay subtext around every conceivable corner. It shouldn't come as any surprise, however, that this is the part I've really been waiting for. Unfortunately, the pickings for homoromantic endings in FE6 are fairly slim even in comparison to the other GBA games, but there's a few standouts here and there. Elphin and Percival partake of some of that sweet Lord Knight subtext found in many Fire Emblem games, with their support line ending with Percival imploring his prince to return home to him once he's done wandering the land as a bard. Neither character has much in the way of anything else going on either, so I'm pretty confident in this one. A bit more awkwardly though, we have to talk about Klein. Klein's already gotten a lot of action in this list between Thea and whatever's going on with him and his sister, but this guy seriously has a thing for fabricating fraternal relationships. In all three of his supports with other men, Elfin and Percival included, their relationship gets referred to as brotherly at one point or another. Contrary to what certain internet discourse might suggest, brother zoning is not necessarily a thing, since historically speaking, queer people have at times defined their relationships in familial terms, as opposed to always trying to frame them just like heterosexual romance. The most likely one of Klein's male supports to lead to anything in my view, however, has to be his relationship with Deke. Because if a guy saved me from a lion, and then came back into my life years later willing to come home with me while looking this naked, I'd jump on that for sure. Klein can call Deke Big Brother in as kinky a manner as he pleases. Anyway though, that's not quite all Deke's got going on, as his support line with Rutger recalls the supports and paired ending of Garrick and Joshua from Sacred Stones, a rough and tumble mercenary duo working through their emotional troubles and, sparring. Sure, there's like 20 support lines just like that in any given Fire Emblem, but sometimes you have to pick the one that makes you squint the least. While I'm at it, I'll toss Bors and Barth in here too, the spear and shield of Ostia. Not terribly exciting, but I wanted to throw the armor guys a bit of a bone here, since they're pretty bland otherwise. This brings me, at last, to the lesbians. In the past, I have occasionally been accused of not paying sufficient attention to sapphic relationships, which, even considering my own personal inclinations, in other words that I'm a gay guy, isn't entirely true for the videos where I discuss gay subtext in broad strokes. And for the record, Binding Blade does not make this easy. There are 143 support lines in this game, and do you know how many of those are between two women? 14! That's not even 10% of them. This game passes the Bechdel test, but not by much. And 3 of those 14 support lines are between sisters, while another 4 involve Faye, who, as mentioned, is pretty weird to consider in a romantic context. Like, maybe her friendship with Sophia develops into something else once she's gone through dragon puberty, I don't know. Another major hindrance here is that the game's largest source of sapphic subtext comes to us from Guinevere and her 2 loyal retainers Ellen and Melody, her more gently homo-romantic Lord Knight vibes. But Guinevere is not a playable character in the main story and has no supports. And while FE7 does have one paired ending that's not directly tied to the support system, Nils is at least also playable. A bit fortunately, Ellen and Melody do support each other, so I could see this as the two of them building a connection and then returning to their queen to be Byrne's power throuple. Maybe Ellen marries Melody's brother Zeiss as a cover, in case one of them needs a beard. The other really noteworthy character to mention here is Echidna, who's about as physically butch as Fire Emblem women are allowed to get before IS gets scared. And indeed, none of Echidna's supports with men indicate much of anything going on, which is notable when just about every other woman in this cast who isn't a literal child has some level of ship keys with at least one man. Regrettably, her only female support partner is Larum, and there's not really much going on there, but at the end Larum does say that everyone loves Echidna, which I can kinda see if we're holding this up alongside supports in the other GBA games. Gwendolyn can keep up the theme of lightly queer Ostian armors with her Lelina support, which one could read as a lady and knight pairing in development. Last but not least, I need to highlight Clarine and Dorothy, who have a dynamic similar to Maribel and Olivia from Awakening, or, for a more topical reference, a less dramatic rendition of Gelfie. Pink goes good with, orange? And with that, we've hit our grand total of 34, comprising a respectable range of paired endings similar in scope to those of the other 2 GBA titles. I don't think I was too biased there with the gay options, although the constraints of such an old game did what they could to ensure that. If you disagree with any of my choices for FE6 paired endings and want to give a shout out to a support line that you think deserves some attention here, go ahead and do so in the comments. And be sure to like and subscribe to my channel for more Fire Emblem content. Let me know too if you'd like to see me tackle something like this for Fire Emblem Engage in the future, because that game's begging for some proper paired endings as well. Thanks for watching, everyone. Au revoir.